So, welcome everybody to this session number 3 of Living Through the Gita. And we ourselves are living through a very challenging time. And thank you, all of you, for joining this session. I think we've got more than 85 people who joined us today. So, welcome. And if you haven't seen the previous 2 sessions, they are available on the YouTube on a channel called Living Through the Gita. This has been specially set up for this program called Living Through the Gita, and the previous 2 sessions are available on that channel. So this session we are going to talk about Bhagavan's response to Arjuna's condition. In other words, how to live and act in the world with equanimity. If we can just translate in one sentence Bhagavan's response to Arjuna's condition, one would say how to live and act in this world with equanimity. And this is something which we need a lot at the moment because we are living in very challenging situation with the COVID virus, which has affected the whole world. It's a global phenomena which is taking place, and everybody is in a lot of stress and anxiety about themselves, about their family, about the world, everything. We are kind of thrown into a state of turmoil. So it is much relevant for us to then also look at how we can live and act in this situation, in the world, with as much as equanimity as we can. And what are the tools and techniques of doing this? So Bhagavan's response to Arjuna is really pointing out to him, how can one live in this world in such a way, and in relationship to the world, what can one do in terms of the intention, attitude, and behavior, so that we begin to go towards a state of equanimity of the mind. Equanimity means what? It means even when there is a challenge in the world, there's a challenge in our own situation or circumstance, we can deal with it without actually becoming dysfunctional. So how to remain functional, how to remain equanimous and act in the world is what Bhagavan is guiding Arjuna in his own condition, because he is in the middle of the battlefield and is in the state of breakdown, as we saw in the previous session, that his state of the mind and even reflected even in his own body, that he is really in a state of breakdown. And Bhagavan lifts him out of that condition and takes him, guides him, and shows him that there is a possibility of living in a different world, living in the world in a different way, being in the world in a different way, and relating to others in a different way through changing one's own beliefs, attitudes, and intentions. So let's go to the things which we're going to talk about today. And first of all, I'm going to just very briefly review the last session which we did, which consisted of Arjuna's condition, and again go back to this structure of experiential learning. And I want to keep on emphasizing this again and again, because I think, when we talk about the practicalities of living through the Gita, then it means that we also need to understand what is experiential learning. In other words, that how do we learn through our experience in life? And therefore, there is a way in which we can understand it. And I want to keep on emphasizing that again and again, so that we don't lose track of this idea that there is something which we ourselves have to practice in order to live through the Gita. The precepts, the concepts, the ideas, the techniques which are given to Arjuna by Lord Krishna, this is what we need to learn and to also practice and to experience. So I'll again talk about that as well. And then, of course, Bhagavan's response and overall teaching. And as I mentioned last time, that we can roughly look at it, this chapter number 2, in terms of various sections. So section 1, where Arjuna is still expressing further doubts about fighting the war, and towards the end of this particular section, he surrenders to Lord Krishna and says, look, I don't know now what to do. I'm totally confused. My mind is paralyzed. My body is in a state of complete anxiety. Now I'm surrendering to you, Lord Krishna. Tell me what to do. And then, of course, Lord Krishna begins his guidance. And the first sections of that guidance is the basis of knowledge. And this is what we call Sankhya. Sankhya is in short, it is the knowledge which Lord Krishna is going to give to Arjuna. The next section is about guidance in terms of the social norm. So Lord Krishna then brings him down to another level of looking at his condition and the solution to that condition by telling him there is a social norm through which you can then begin to look at this, and maybe that will prompt you to stand up and fight. Then Lord Krishna is giving the guidance in a different way, in the sense of the practice of the knowledge is already given in terms of Sankhya. So he says, I've been telling you about Sankhya, now I'm going to tell you about yoga. So this is the basis of selfless action, which is the core of the teaching of Bhagavad Gita. It is about how to act in the world, how to be in the world, how to kind of have a certain attitude and an intention in the world. So it becomes selfless action. And there's a whole kind of substratum of knowledge which is given by Sankhya, and which is again and again emphasized in the whole of the Bhagavad Gita, in all its 18 remaining 17 chapters, 16 chapters, that Lord Krishna emphasizes this core aspect of how to be in the world and how to act in the world. And then he gives Arjuna the markers of the person of wisdom, because at this point, Arjuna asks him, really, who is this person who has attained the knowledge, who is living that knowledge according to his own life, and what are the markers of such a person of wisdom, and how can we kind of distinguish this person from other people who are living in the world. And then, of course, at the end, I want you to all think about really what will you do now? Because this is the teaching. I'm kind of laying it out for you in this structure, which then tells you what is the knowledge, what is the basis of selfless action, and then what are the exercises you can start doing over the next 1 month, which will kind of give you an idea about what it is to practice some of these things. So this is going to be your homework. Okay, let's go to the review of the last session. And you remember that Arjuna's condition, he was in the middle of the battlefield. There are the players in the battle who are the two sets of cousins, the Kauravas and the Pandavas. And Arjuna tells Lord Krishna to take him into the middle of the battlefield so that he can see who he is going to fight against. Who are these people who have joined up with Duryodhana and who are fighting against the Pandavas? And when he sees Bhishma and Drona, his perception is completely kind of taken in a different direction. So Arjuna's perception and arguments is what we talked about, that he sees omens, that something is going to go wrong. He presents 5 arguments as to why he thinks he should not fight. And having talked about the various aspects of his experience at that time, and saying that he doesn't want to fight because it is not the right thing to do, to kill the kith and kin, especially his teachers, his elders, and Bhishma representing the elders and Drona representing the teachers. He says that he doesn't want to kill them, he doesn't want to slay them, and therefore he says, even if I slay them, that I will not enjoy this kingdom because there'll be blood on my hands, and so on and so on. So we got those arguments which we discussed quite in detail in the last session. And then Arjuna, of course, says, okay, I'm not going to fight. Decision is that I am not going to fight. I don't see the point of this. It looks a completely meaningless kind of situation in which I find myself, and I don't think I want to fight. So he puts his bow and arrow down, he puts his Gandiva bow down, and he says, I don't want to fight, and he becomes silent. So this is the Arjuna condition. And remember, Arjuna's condition is my condition. I emphasized that point in the last two sessions as well, is that Arjuna is really a representative of humanity. Lord Krishna is the divine teacher. The divine teacher is giving Arjuna as a representation, as a representative of humanity, and saying to him, this is what I want to guide you through so that you can function in the world in a different way, so that you achieve the ultimate purpose of life. And you remember we talked about the meaning, purpose, values as far as the spiritual aspect is concerned, as far as spirituality is concerned. What is the meaning? What is the purpose? What are the values one should follow? And of course, the meaning is that I'm a spiritual being living in an embodied form. And this is very much emphasized in chapter number 2 by Lord Krishna, who says, this is Sankya, this is knowledge. The knowledge is that you are not this body, mind, intellect, you are the spiritual being who finds himself in this embodied form. And having found yourself in this embodied form, you just have got to endure the levels of your being, and at the same time to function in such a way that it takes you towards your purpose. And that purpose is to achieve moksha. It is the purpose is to achieve liberation. To achieve purpose is to really find the truth about yourself. What is the truth about yourself is that you are the spiritual being, and to locate yourself in the spiritual being, so that you are no longer kind of identified with the body, mind, intellect, and you have gone beyond the body, mind, intellect. And then Bhagwan's response and overall teaching, we saw that, how his immediate response was to admonish him and tell him, look, this is unbefitting of you. It is un-Aryan. It is going to exclude you from heaven. And he responds to Arjuna at his own level. So he has not yet started giving him the guidance. It is only when Arjuna uh, tells him that, I'm totally confused, you guide me now. At this moment, he's not the teacher. He is a friend who is telling Arjuna that you forget about all this. You stand up and fight because it's not befitting you. You don't be cowardly. Don't be impotent. And he uses several words to describe and tell him that this is what you seem to be doing. You forget about all that and you stand up and fight. Of course, Arjuna doesn't. He kind of comes up with another argument to say that, this is not the right thing and it is completely meaningless and I'm not going to fight. So what Lord Krishna does then is to start giving him the knowledge. And this knowledge is really reframing Arjuna's experience in a different way. So when he says that I'm experiencing this enormous grief and pity, and this experience of grief and pity is really making me to break down. Lord Krishna says, you are experiencing this simply because your belief system, which you have at the moment, is producing this kind of response within yourself. This experience is coming because there is an underlying belief which is there. And I want to show you that that underlying belief is really not the right belief you should be having. And this knowledge which I'm going to give you is going to shift your beliefs away from this wrong belief to the right belief. And when that begins to shift, your experience will be then looked at from a different point of view. You will experience life in a different way. Now, I will also show you that, this is part and parcel of our experiential learning. That when we reframe our beliefs and our intention and our attitudes from a different basis, then we find that we experience life differently. Now, this is kind of no rocket science. It is something very simple. And this is something which we do in our own lives. It is that we are taking a certain knowledge which Lord Krishna is giving in terms of the Sankya and taking that as a basis of our future living in this world. Okay, so he gives him this reframing through this knowledge and shows him the different pathways, the pathway of wisdom, the pathway of action, selfless action, and then he comes together and he gives him the outcome of being in this world in this way by saying, this is the person of steady wisdom. This is how you recognize such a person who is living in this kind of steady wisdom. So this is what we are going to talk about, Arjuna's condition. As we saw, Arjuna is a great warrior who wants to fight, win. He sees Bhishma, grandsire, a representative, as an elder, and Drona, his teacher, and he becomes totally overwhelmed. He sees them and thinks it would be wrong to kill them, and is overcome by this tremendous feeling of guilt and of grief that, they are going to die. And I feel a lot of grief. So, seeing them, he then comes up with his five arguments why he should not fight. And in this state, he gets confused. His bodily symptoms of anxiety. He puts down his bow and he says he cannot fight, and asks Krishna to tell him decisively what is good for him. He has become dysfunctional at this stage, and therefore, he is in a state where he is putting his bow and arrow down and saying, "Look, I cannot fight now." So Arjuna's perception and argument at this point, we can say that he is displaying or exhibiting the classical symptoms of an acute anxiety reaction. So what is that? Limbs are quivering, mouth is drying up, whole body is trembling, his hair is standing on end, his Gandiva bow is slipping, his skin is burning, legs are trembling, unable to fight, and unable to stand any longer due to impatience, forgetfulness, and a whirling mind. And he sees causes of misfortune. So in this three verses, Vedavyasa is showing us the state of Arjuna, expressing his anxiety at the level of the body. As you can see that this is quite a detailed description of Arjuna's condition. And these are some of the things we recognize of ourselves. So, for example, if you're asked to, you've never done a speech before, and you're told to, stand up and do a speech on the spur of the moment, what happens? Your limbs start quivering, your mouth dries up, the whole body starts trembling, and so on and so on. So this is anxiety. Anxiety because here's something have been asked to do, and it is on the spur of the moment, and I need to do it right now. And if I don't do it, consequences will follow. So Arjuna then has convinced himself that the war is pointless, he has no meaning for him, he sees dangers in continuing and fears the consequences of war, he is no longer sure of himself, his role, his choices. He is in extremely distressed state at this point. And Arjuna says in 2.7, my mind is overpowered by taint of emotion, pity, and grief. My intellect is confused as to duty, choice, and action. Tell me decisively what is good for me. So he's saying, tell me decisively what is good for me. In other words, what is good for me in terms of this situation in the middle of the battlefield? What should I do? Should I fight or should I not fight? And this is really the kind of, question he's asking him. Tell me decisively. In other words, don't kind of waver about or don't confuse me even more because I'm already confused. Tell me decisively what is good for me, and instruct me, and I have taken refuge in thee. Okay. So here we see that on the one hand, he's asking Lord Krishna decisively what is good for me, but on the other hand, he's also saying, instruct me. Instruct me, in other words, that go beyond and explain to me what is good for me. And also the point that he has taken refuge in me. He's surrendered. He is surrendered to Lord Krishna. And in that state of surrender, in that state of anticipation of the knowledge, in that state whereby he is now saying, I don't know what to do, decisively tell me what to do, this is where now the teaching will begin. So Arjuna says further, I do not see how it would remove my sorrow that burns up my senses. Even I should attain prosperous and unrivaled dominion on earth, or even lordship over the gods. Having spoken thus, Arjuna says, I will not fight, and he becomes silent. This is verse number 9 in chapter number 2. This is now when Bhagavan responds to Arjuna. So we'll come to that. Now, briefly, I just want to again explain experiential learning once more. So let's look at that. So the overall scheme which we are talking about here in terms of living through the Gita is that there is the knowledge of the Gita which is being imparted to Arjuna in this way, and the practice of that particular knowledge. And this is where the transformation, the change, the inner change will take place. Okay? Knowledge will then manifest itself as practice in our lives, and therefore the inner transformation begins to take place because we are now internalizing the knowledge. In terms of Arjuna's condition, he is in a state of suffering, and the practice is going to lead towards an inner purification, what we can call sattvification in terms of the guna, three gunas. And here, then it results in finally in self-realization. And we saw the scheme of things, which I mentioned even in session number 2, and I will touch on it again. So intellectual knowledge takes you only this far. And intellect needs to guide action with knowledge, leading to this inner change. And that is why we need the practice. Practice is the only way in which this knowledge can become internalized, and we go from suffering to inner purity, which begins to have an effect immediately in our life and in our mind, and ultimately we reach the goal of self-realization. This is called living through the Gita. Okay, and this is really what we'll be talking all along. And as I mentioned, that primarily it is about these three things. How can I change my beliefs? How can I change my attitudes? How can I change my intention? And these through my thought and my feelings, because these thoughts and feelings are nothing but the expression of my past conditioning, my vasanas, my beliefs, attitudes, and intention. We can structure the vasanas in this kind of way, and we can say, now this is going to lead to a certain behavior. Okay, and these are all interrelated. So the thought will kind of relate to the feeling, and the feelings are related to the thoughts, and both these things are related to the behavior, and the behavior itself is related to the beliefs, attitude, and intention. Okay, so this is the kind of scheme which will help us to understand what we need to change and how it is going to result in the practice in terms of a certain kind of behavior. So beliefs, attitude, intention, body sensation, thoughts, feelings, and behavior. In the context of Arjuna, Arjuna is thinking killing is bad. That is his belief. I must have compassionate attitude towards my kith and kin. This is the attitude, and therefore his intention: I need to fight, but I'm totally confused. And therefore, the thought process through his five arguments, he says, I cannot fight because of A, B, C, D, E. Right? And then what are these feelings? What are the feelings which are uppermost, which have overwhelmed him? Are these feelings of guilt and shame and grief? Okay, and there is a weakness, there is a skin burning, tearful eyes. These are all bodily sensations, which is experience. And then behavior: I'm not going to fight. Tell me what to do. Can you see how it is related to the Arjuna condition? And we can use our own beliefs and attitudes and intention to understand what is going on in our own thoughts, in our own feelings, and why do we do the things which we do, which is behavior. Okay, so we need to become aware of all these things, because without awareness we cannot analyze anything. And I'll show you that there is also another way in which we can begin to analyze our behavior and to learn about it and then to change it. So change in beliefs, attitude, and intention. This is really going to come to the knowledge. And then how is that going to be thought about? First of all, you listen to the knowledge, then you reflect on the knowledge, then you practice the knowledge. And through the practice, listening, and reflection, this will bring about a certain focus in your mind and in your life, and that results in transformation. So this is the learning cycle. Okay, listening, reflecting, practicing, and you keep on going around until the right knowledge, the right belief, the right intention comes about in our practice. So I mentioned to you about the ego operating system. This is where we are before we enter the spiritual pathway. The past conditioning is all the experiences we have had since our birth, and indeed, even in our previous birth, we have brought that back here into this life. And we can analyze this vasanas in terms of these three things: intentions, beliefs, and attitudes. In terms of the body, the mind, and the intellect, as I was saying, the bodily sensation, the feelings in the mind, the thoughts in the intellect, sensations, feelings, and thoughts. And this gives rise to actions and reactions within oneself and action in the outside world. So this is what is operating at the moment. Okay, this is another way of looking at how can we understand our own feelings and our own experiences and our own actions in the world. Okay, so this is the me and the mind. This is the ego individual. So remember, this is the Gita's framework for inner transformation and self-realization. So this, let me just move this slightly here. Okay, so from the ego operating systems where we start, where we are before we enter the spiritual pathway, which is self-centered, selfishness is there, attachment is there, the me and the mind is there, to a dharma operating system where we begin to work selflessly in the spirit of karma yoga, doing our actions according to the stage and station of our life. Selflessness is there, detachment is there, thee and thine, which is the way in which we then begin to operate. And then in the God operating system, we have now gone beyond the ego. We have gone even beyond any functioning which belongs to an individuality. And there is no longer any ego. There's only love and compassion. And the actions are according to the divine design. Okay? So purification and then self-realization. So keep this in mind, because this is really, when we are looking at the individual verses of the Bhagavad Gita, then we can place them in the scheme of understanding. This is the practice which we need to think about. This is the knowledge which is going to be given to us. Is the first stage of our spiritual journey is about purification. The next stage is about self-realization. So steps for learning and conscious inner change: you need to become aware and make sense of what is happening to you and understand how you operate with the ego operating system and the outcomes. You need to examine the intentions, attitudes, and beliefs inherent in your current ego operating systems. And then you need to think about how you can change each one of these to align to the ones given to Arjuna by Lord Krishna. In other words, the knowledge which is given to Arjuna, we need to think about where am I in terms of beliefs which I am having at this moment. How do they compare to the belief which is given to me by the Bhagavad Gita, and the attitude and intention similarly, and to see how I can change it through my actions as well. Okay? And this is the process of changing oneself consciously. Okay. Now let's turn our attention to the main teaching as it is given in the chapter number 2. So again, just to remind ourselves, structure of chapter number 2 is this: knowledge is there, practice is there, and the outcome is there. What is the knowledge? Knowledge is Sankhya, knowledge of the self. Verses 2:11 to verse number 30. Lord Krishna takes Arjuna through the understanding of this knowledge. Secondly, he is telling him how this knowledge is going to be translated in terms of action. How are you going to practice this knowledge? And this practice primarily kind of translates itself in karma yoga. And he gives the kind of outline of karma yoga in this chapter. And then the outcome, person of perfection. So through the knowledge and the practice, one begins to attain perfection. Okay? And these are the characteristics of the one who is established in this knowledge. And this is the Sthita Prajna Lakshana, which Lord Krishna gives to Arjuna in verses 54 to 72. So this is again the overall kind of structure of the Gita. So chapter number 2. Now again, going back to what I was talking about, how are we going to change according to the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita? That we're going to change the belief, attitude, and intention, and through reflection and practice, we are going to then have this inner transformation which is going to take place. This is guaranteed. This is not my word. This is Lord Krishna who is telling us, guaranteed, if we are going to change the belief, attitude, intention according to the highest knowledge given to him, given to Arjuna by him, this Sankhya, this knowledge, if we are willing to take this knowledge and practice it, and through reflection, through listening, then this transformation is guaranteed. And it is not, again, as I was saying, there's living proof that there are masters who have attained this state of realization. And And therefore, it is our duty and responsibility, actually, to not only read the Bhagavad Gita, to understand it, to get the knowledge, and then to start practicing it in our own lives. So let's go to the first section, which is talking about Arjuna's further doubts and surrender to Lord Krishna. So here, Krishna's immediate response is what? Is one of admonition. He tells him, you are in a perilous condition. This is un-Aryan-like, heaven excluding, disgraceful, unbefitting, helplessness. This is a weakness of your heart which needs to be cast off. He says, stand up and fight. This is what he's telling him in number 2 and 3. He's telling him, just stand up and fight. Okay. Now, at this moment, Bhagavan is speaking to Arjuna within his own framework. Okay. He has not started his teaching yet. And why is he just, telling Arjuna in this particular way is because Arjuna has not yet surrendered and asked for his guidance. So Krishna speaks to him as a friend. Okay. When you're speaking to a friend, you can speak in this manner. But when the friend starts telling you, no, you must explain to me, you must tell me, the knowledge and give me guidance, then you become the teacher. Then you become the guide. So at this stage, Arjuna has not yet surrendered, and therefore Lord Krishna is speaking to him as a friend and talking to him with his own framework. What is his own framework? Is this one of being an Aryan, being a Kshatriya, and having this strong heart. And he is supposed to stand up and fight. Therefore, Lord, immediate response is an admonition, telling him that you must stand up and fight. But then Arjuna comes up with more reasons for not fighting. Cannot slay my noble teachers, and this is pointless. So 4 to 6, he tells Lord Krishna, actually, I think, I don't see the point of this particular war. I don't see point of fighting. And therefore, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to fight. In this state of total confusion, he now surrenders to Krishna and asks for instruction as what to do in 7 and 8. And then the teaching begins. This is where now the teaching will begin. And now we just to kind of understand how Arjuna has descended into delusion. Remember, Arjuna is you and me. How did this Arjuna's condition arise in the first place? And I'm going to give you an overall scheme of this knowledge which tells us how we descend into delusion that I am this body, mind, intellect, and this world is the world of names and forms, individual, diverse names and forms, and how this delusion is making me to suffer. And these are the 7 steps of descent into delusion. This is the Arjuna state, this dejection, this sorrow, this grief. His condition is, I am in grief because I will kill. I cannot bear this. I will not fight. Now, you can take this one sentence and translate it in your own lives. I'm feeling very angry and I'm going to hit out. I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and so on and so on. So this is where we are in this state of delusion, totally identified with the ego, operating with the ego operating system, and this is what happens. Why is there sorrow? Is because there is an attachment to things, people, and situations. Attachment of Arjuna to his kith and kin, which is called moha, is giving rise to grief and sorrow. So the question is, where is this attachment coming from? Attachment is because I am embodied. With this embodiment and identification with the BMI, I'm having this attachment. Why am I having this body and identity? Because of my karma. My past karma has manifested itself into this life, in this body, in this person, because of my past karma. Why karma? Because of likes and dislike. I like this, I don't like this. And therefore we generate more and more karma. If we generate more and more karma, what happens? We go again and again through the cycle of birth and death. Number 5, why likes and dislikes? Because of the habit of superimposition by the mind. The mind is looking at the world outside and superimposing likes and dislikes on everything. I like this person, I don't like this person. I like this phone, I don't like this phone, and so on and so on. This habit of superimposition, because we are in this embodied, identified form, gives rise to likes and dislike, and because of this superimposition. So why this superimposition? Because I am in this subject-object duality. And because I see myself as subject and I see the objective reality uh, in front of me, I perceive it, therefore I am separate from the world. I am an individual subject existing in the world of so many objects. Okay, so why duality? Duality because of the ignorance of the non-dual self. The whole teaching of Vedanta is to come to understand and experience the non-dual self. Brahma Vidya, it is called. Brahma Vidya is I am Brahman. Aham Brahmasmi. This is the Mahavakya. And the whole point of all these things is to get out of my sorrow and suffering and to work through all these steps. And Lord Krishna has organized this Bhagavad Gita teaching in such a way that it touches on each one of these steps in a very specific way in terms of knowledge and practice. He's going to show how to give up attachment. He's going to show us how to get out of identification. He's going to show us how to stop our karma in its track. He's going to show us how likes and dislikes can be discarded. He's going to show us how superimposition can stop. And he's going to take us beyond the subject-object duality into the knowledge of the self, the non-dual self, and we go beyond suffering into the state of realization. Okay, so here's the first part of it, the knowledge of the self. Okay, so what is the knowledge of the self? This is now what Lord Krishna's guidance is starting. Arjuna has surrendered to him. Arjuna is saying, decisively tell me what to do. I'm confused. I don't know what to do. Tell me what is the best thing for me to do. So here is the basis of knowledge. Okay, so remember, this is the knowledge which Lord Krishna, being the teacher he is not going to give him a philosophical discourse. He is going to tell him how his condition is related to the knowledge he is going to give him. Okay, and therefore remember that the knowledge in the way it which is being imparted to Arjuna at this point is in the context of Arjuna's condition. So how does it start? Arjuna is saying, I am in grief because I will kill, I cannot bear this, I will not fight. So here's the summary of the guidance. If we take the first 4 verses of Lord Krishna's guidance, they provide a kind of overall summary of what his guidance is going to be. So starting with 2:11, the wise person does not grieve neither for the living nor for the dead. In other words, that you are in the state of grief and you're talking like a wise person, but actually you are not. The real wise person who has the right knowledge will not grieve either for the living or for the dead. So can you see how Lord Krishna is immediately connecting the knowledge to the Arjuna's condition? And why is this? Because there is no death for the Atman, your true self. See, Arjuna is afraid of killing the kith and the kin. So he's saying, actually, you're, scared that these people are going to die. He said, there is no death. There is no death for the Atman, your true self. And all these people have their true self as their core identity. And he says, one should not grieve for the living or for the dead simply because there is no death for the Atman, your true self. And he says, life after life, the jiva, which is the causal body and the subtle body, travels from childhood to youth to old age, just like it does that in this life. So also it travels from body to body, life after life, and this is the cycle of birth and death. This is 213. And in this embodied form, experiences are always going to be there. Now, this true self has acquired a body because of the past karma. And this body is going through changes in this life. Not only that, when it leaves this body, it will acquire another body. And this cycle of birth and death is going on. And while you are in this embodied form, you will have experiences all the time. And these experiences have a beginning, they have an end, and all you need to do is learn how to endure them bravely. Titiksha, he says. Titiksha is the capacity to endure all the things which are going on in the body, mind, intellect. Okay? This capacity is a very important um, virtue or value which we need to imbibe in our lives. The firm person is not afflicted by whatever is going on in the body, mind, intellect, and he is now fit to realize the immortal self. So, in this uh, 5 verses, Lord Krishna is giving the summary of the guidance. This is the logic. The logic is there, which tells him that actually this is how you are in this condition, and the teaching which I'm giving you is really to do with the grief which you are experiencing, and how this grief is uncalled for. If you're a wise person, if you have the right knowledge, then there is no grieving to be done. Okay, and this is the logic he comes up with. So going further, he says this is the self. Now, this is the highest knowledge. This is the knowledge of the self. He says this self is real and has no non being. The unreal has no being. On the other hand, the real has no non being. In other words, that the existence is pure existence, it is eternal. Okay? It is indestructible, it is imperishable, all pervading, and cannot be slain. It is unborn, eternal, changeless, and it is ancient. What is it describing? Is describing the Atman, is describing Brahman, and is saying this is your true nature, this is your true self, and this is the one which cannot be slain. See, again, he's referring back to Arjuna's context in which he's experiencing his dysfunctional condition. And he's saying this cannot be slain. It is unborn, eternal, changeless, ancient. Weapons, fire, water, wind cannot affect it. It cannot be cut, it cannot be burned, moistened, or dried. It is eternal, all pervading, stable, immovable, ancient. Okay, so this he is giving a clear idea as to what this self is. And he's giving all these labels: indestructible, imperishable, all pervading, eternal, unborn, changeless, ancient, stable, immovable. All these are really the pointers towards the real self. And if this knowledge is there with us, then there's no question of doubting that this body is coming to an end, and therefore everything comes to an end. Okay, because our true nature is the self. It is eternal. It is changeless, and it is all-pervading. Okay, what about the body? So he's talked about the self. Now, what about the body? So the body has an end, and it is not the self. So fight on, remembering that the end is not going to come simply because the body has come to an end. Okay? This again is linking back to Arjuna's context, linking back to his condition. He says that if you think you're going to kill them, then no one is slain, nor a slayer, knowing that the self to be indestructible, eternal, unborn, inexhaustible. This, he says, is really the truth behind why you should fight. Is because if you are afraid that these bodies are going to come to an end, actually they are not. And this jiva, which discards worn out bodies, gets into new ones, just as you discard old clothes and put on new ones. Just as we, get rid of old clothes and put on new ones, so also the body will discard this body and acquire a new body. And this happens when our portion of our karma, which is called the prarabdha karma, comes to an end. We discard this body, and then we have another set of prarabdha karma for the next life. So you should not grieve. Remember, he has talked about the self, he has talked about the body, he has talked about the self and the body in the context of Arjuna's condition and why Arjuna is in this state of grief and why he's saying, I will not kill, I will not fight. And he's in this grief. And Lord Krishna is telling him now, you do not grieve. Do not grieve because the self is unmanifest, unthinkable, unchangeable. There is constant birth and death. Death is certain for the born. Birth is certain for the dead. And therefore, beings are unmanifest in the beginning, manifest in the middle, unmanifest again at the end. So therefore, there is no need to grieve. Why? Because this cycle is going on, whereas the self itself is unmanifest. It is not changing. It is not dying. Nothing is happening to it. It cannot be cut. It cannot be burned, etc., which is said before. And the indweller, which is the self, is indestructible. And he says, this is a great wonder. No one understands after hearing this. Some people get amazed that this is the truth, this is the knowledge, but really no one understands it. And he says, in case you do not understand, let me bring you back to another level of understanding. Okay. So this is Lord Krishna's guidance. This is the knowledge of the self, the knowledge of the self in relationship to the body in relationship to a transactional world, in terms of the ego operating system, in terms of our identification with the body, mind, intellect. And then he says, you should not grieve because if you focus on this knowledge that you are the self, you are unchangeable, you cannot die, you are eternal, then the whole picture changes. This is what I was calling reframing. Reframing Arjuna's experience of grief and his choice not to fight is reframing this experience and this action on giving this guidance. And he's telling him, this is the knowledge, and if you look at it from this point of view, then you are not actually the slayer, nor are you going to be slain. There is no need to grieve, and therefore you stand up and fight. But he says, in case you do not understand this, then let me tell you. Now here, Lord Krishna is coming back to this point as what Arjuna should be doing in terms of his own social norm and duty. Okay, so he says, by performing this prescribed action for a Kshatriya, do your duty, fight in this righteous war. You will have gains. You will either gain kingdom or you will gain heaven from fighting. And what are the losses? If you don't fight, then you are going to have dishonor. People will mock you. You will have infamy. You will be sinning because you're not following your duty and responsibility. And this is because you're not going to fight. You will be mocked as a coward, and this will be very painful for you because you are a Kshatriya. Fight because fighting, you will die and attain heaven, or you will win and enjoy this earth. See how he's bringing him back to the understanding of his own role as a Kshatriya. Engage in battle for sake of battle. Okay, even if you take that knowledge away which I gave you just now and you say you don't understand what you're talking about, then for the sake of battle, for the sake of his responsibility as a Kshatriya, equal in pleasure and pain, gain and loss, victory and defeat, you will not incur sin if you fight in this manner for the sake of battle itself. So from 31 to 38, this is telling him another perspective from the perspective of social norm and his own duty as a Kshatriya. Right. So this is the knowledge. Okay. Now this knowledge, is going to be repeated throughout the Bhagavad Gita, throughout the rest of the chapters. In one way or the other, this knowledge will come in terms of the self, in terms of the world, and the self in the world, the concept of Ishvara, the concept of the avatar. All this will be kind of given in terms of the practice and the knowledge which is related to the self, as he has described in this chapter. So this first part is called Sankhya. Now Lord Krishna takes him through the yoga part of it. And this is from 29 to 53. So this is now the basis of selfless action. This is called Karma Yoga. Okay. And he says, having heard the knowledge of the self Sankhya, now know the practice of this knowledge, which is called yoga, where you will cast off the bonds of action, experience no loss of effort or any contrary result, and you will gain protection from great fear. See, this is the immediate result of functioning in life in this way. Fear begins to disappear. There is no contrary result. And there is no loss of effort. You can't say, okay, I believe that I'm the self. I don't have to do anything. There's no loss of effort either. And you cast off the bonds of action. And here he says, you experience a single pointed determination. You need to shift your frame of thinking from away from attainments for heaven and earth through Vedic rituals, and is connecting the Vedic rituals, because at that time people were very much engaged in Vedic rituals, and this is really one way of functioning in life, because you do some rituals to attain some things either here on this earth, or you have some attainment in heaven. But he says, forget about all that. Your frame of thinking is not going to be about attainment through this kind of Vedic rituals. Yes, they have their use, but you need to move beyond into the knowledge of the self. So he is taking him from the Vedic ritualistic way of looking at things and functioning in life to a Vedantic way, which is all about the knowledge of the self. Okay. So this is a shift he's saying. You need to shift your frame of thinking. In 42, 46, he's talking about this shift of thinking. Just in case Arjuna misunderstands the idea of action, it is not about Vedic action. It is about Vedantic action in terms of transactional actions done in a certain way. So what will you do after knowing that self? He says, know that your right is to work only. This is the famous teaching in the Bhagavad Gita, the famous verse which says, know that your right is to work only, never to the result. Let not the result be your motive, but do not get attached to inaction either. So it doesn't mean that, okay, I'm not interested in the result and therefore there is no point in doing any action. He says, don't get attached to inaction. Your right is to work only, never to the result. Okay. So perform action, abandon attachment to the result. He says, become steadfast in yoga and experience equanimity, which is nothing but yoga. See, this is the first thing which I was telling you, the two major outcomes of living through the Gita: equanimity of the mind. He says this is nothing but what I'm going to tell you is through the practice, yoga, practice, equanimity are one and the same thing. So this equanimity is a very important word. Samatvam bhava. This samatvam is what he mentions again and again and again. Okay, in the Bhagavad Gita. And this equanimity of the mind is attained how? It is attained through this practice, which is describing here. Perform action, focus your attention on the action, abandon attachment to the result, become steadfast in yoga, and experience equanimity. And he says, seek refuge in knowledge, because the ego action with attachment is much lower than the yoga. So there is ego operating system, which is action done with attachment. And we are interested in the result of the action, and we get attached to the result of the action. This is not to be done. He says this is much lower than yoga. The way in which he's describing here is that practice done with the wisdom, taking refuge in the wisdom, in the knowledge. When we function in life, when we transact in this world, then what happens is that we gain this equanimity, which is described in 48. And then it tells us the next outcome. The next major outcome, he says, cast off all self-centered deed, endowed with knowledge, and devote yourself to yoga. Yoga is skill in action. So skill in action done in a certain way leads to equanimity. And how is this to be done? He says, cast off all self-centered deeds, selfless action, which is endowed with knowledge and practice coming together. Change your belief system, change your intention, change your attitude, and devote yourself to yoga in this kind of way. Seek refuge in the knowledge. And he says that if you perform this action, abandon attachment to the result, become steadfast, then not only do you get equanimity, but also you acquire skill in action. What does this mean, skill in action? It means that you are spontaneously able to carry out the right action because you are now embedded in this wisdom. This wisdom is giving you the ability to make the right choices without any kind of confusion, without any kind of doubt. You immediately take the right action as you go along. So, what will you do after knowing about the self? He says, act in the world with knowledge, abandon the fruit of the action, and you will get liberated from the bondages of birth and realize the self beyond the BMI. So this is, the outcome. He says that if you function in the world whereby with this knowledge, you act in the world, you function in the world, you abandon the fruit of the action, and you will get liberated from the bondages of birth and realize the self beyond the BMI. In other words, that you will achieve the highest state of consciousness, which is the state of realization that you are Brahman. Okay, Tattvamasi. This is the Mahavakya, that thou art. This is actually the state which is realized when one practices in this way. One goes beyond the body, mind, intellect identification and realizes the self. So you go beyond delusion of duality. You remember the seventh step of descent into delusion. You are now coming out of the delusion. You go beyond delusion of duality. And what happens? You attain indifference to what has been heard, in other words, the past, and what is yet to be heard, in other words, the future. At this moment, we are living either in the past or living for the anxiety of the future. So either the regrets of the past or the anxieties of the future are infiltrating my present moment. In other words, I'm not living in the present moment. I'm living either in the past or I'm living in the future. Even at this time when we are in lockdown, we keep on thinking, oh, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? We are living in the future because the future anxieties are coming to me at this particular moment in my life, and therefore I'm not living in the present moment. I'm living in the future. Or when I start thinking, well, I should have done this, I should have done that, and we are living in the past. This happened to me, that happened to me, and all this kind of emotions and thought keep on coming up from the past. And this is where we then say that we are living in the past and the future. We are not living in the present moment. And when we attain indifference to the past and the future, what happens? We are living in the present moment. We are focusing our attention in the action which needs to be done in the present experience. And in this manner, we begin to find an anchor in our true self. Okay, we are now moving towards the true self because we become stable in this knowledge. We become established in this knowledge. And this is what he says, let the intellect remain immovable, even what you hear may be perplexing. Be steady in the self and attain self-realization. So we may hear something perplexing, but because we are established in this knowledge, we have this equanimity, we remain unmovable. We have found our center, which is such a core aspect of ourselves that it is immovable, it is unchangeable. The intellect remains in this immovable center called the self, and when we established and become steady in the self, we attain self-realization. Okay. So this is the guidance according to the action which is related to the knowledge. Okay, so we have seen what Sankya is, the knowledge of the self, the knowledge of the body, the knowledge of our experience in this embodied form. We have seen yoga, the practice of karma yoga, selfless action, which is described in a kind of outline at the moment, but is going to go much more in detail in the next chapter, chapter number 3. And then the next thing which we're going to look at is a person of perfection. So suppose now I have acquire this knowledge. I've changed my belief system. I'm working according to this knowledge and I'm practicing again and again and again. This knowledge in my transactional life on a day-to-day basis, I become established in the practice. I become established in the knowledge. So then what happens? What is the outcome of all this? you become a person of perfection. And Lord Krishna then describes the characteristics to of the one who is established in this knowledge. From verse number 54 to 72, this is called this Sthita Prajna Lakshana. In other words, somebody Sthita means established. Prajna means the knowledge. Somebody who's established in the knowledge. What does he? How does he act in the world? And this is the question which Arjuna is asking him. And in this section, he describes three kind of um, levels of our development. Again, it will go back to our um, three operating system: ego operating system, unsteady; dharma operating system, steady; God operating system, established in the knowledge. Now, how do they function? Let's see what happens. So here's the unsteady, steady, and established. This is what he's describing in this 18 verses of the Sthita Prajna Lakshana section. So unsteady is the one who is full of desires, attachments, is in the me and the mind mode, agitated all the time, no control of the senses, no control of the mind, slips down the ladder of fall. And I'll describe this in a moment. Sleeping in ignorance, senses and mind under control. This is a steady person who has now started practicing according to the knowledge, controlling desires, attachment, anger, and fear, steady in wisdom, able to meditate on the self. And then the one who gets established, satisfied in the self by the self, no desires, free from fear and anger, no I-ness, no minus, equanimity, complete steady wisdom, peace and tranquility. He is now awake in the Brahmic state. He has become Brahman, okay? And he has gone beyond delusion. So these are the three things which he's going to describe. And let's see how he talks about it. So Arjuna is asking, okay, you describe the knowledge to me, you describe the practice. Now tell me, if I become established, such a person of steady wisdom, absorbed in the self, functioning in this way, how does he speak? How does he sit? How does he walk? And in answer to Arjuna's question, Lord Krishna tells him, see, now Arjuna is asking a very sensible question. Remember, he was overwhelmed with grief, and just because of what Lord Krishna has already told him, he has come out to a certain extent. He has come out to such an extent that he is able to ask a sensible question. Okay. So how does he speak? How does he sit? How does he walk? He says, one who is established in wisdom, he says, one who has completely given up all selfish desires and is satisfied in the true self by this true self, whose mind is not shaken by adversity, does not hanker after pleasure and prosperity, is free from attachment, fear, and anger, who is everywhere without attachment, with everything, no attachment at all, and he neither rejoices nor grieves. Okay, again referring back to Arjuna's condition, and who withdraws his senses from the sense object like a tortoise withdraws limbs from all sides. So remember, if a tortoise finds or feels there is some kind of danger, immediately withdraws the limbs and his head into the shell. Okay, so this kind of person who has withdrawn his senses from the sense objects is like a tortoise who withdraws limbs from all sides. And he says, whose longing, which in a state of abstinence, that longing for various objects is not there, but the longing itself disappears on seeing the Supreme. So, we may have given up something. Say, for example, if I say I give up coffee, but the longing for the coffee still remains, okay, because that past conditioning is also there. But what he says, this person of wisdom, even that longing disappears because he has seen something much, much, much more superior than these longings which we had in this transactional world. And on seeing the Supreme, even the longing for everything disappears. Okay, so this is the state of the person established. And further on, he says, this established, this person established in wisdom, he is awake when all others are sleeping, and for whom it is night when others are awake. One who really sees is the Muni. This is the Muni, is the man of wisdom, the person of wisdom. Now, this night and day, awaking and asleep, refers to the state of realization. If you are in the state of realization, you are awake. Everybody else is in a state of ignorance. It is night for them, so they are sleeping, but the Muni is awake. Okay, and when the Muni is in this state, he is the one who really sees. Sees means that he is now in that state of attainment of Brahman, and he is no longer in this kind of state where he is affected by ignorance. Everybody else is in this state of ignorance, and while the Muni is not. He is the one who has attained peace. And peace is a capital P because it's not a peace which is coming through our transaction in the world, our interaction with the world. But this peace comes from a very deep source, the deep source being our true self. This remains unmoved. When into him all desire enter as water into the ocean. This is a wonderful image which Lord Krishna gives us. You know, as the waters enter the ocean remains unmoved. It doesn't move because it is so huge that the water can enter into it and itself remains unmoved. And just like that, the person of attainment removes unmoved whatever is passing through him, whatever is coming to him, he remains at peace and he remains unmoved altogether. And then he goes on to say, who has attained peace, having ended all desires, moves about without longing and without the I-ness and the minus. He is in that God, in a state of Godhood. He is in a state of complete disidentification with the body, mind, intellect. Now it is the God operating system which is functioning through this body, mind, intellect. The ego has completely disappeared. The I-ness is gone. The minus is gone. And this is the one who has attained this Brahmic state. And he is never deluded again. It's a one-way street. Once you get into the Brahmic state, there is never any delusion again. One can attain this oneness with Brahman even at the end of life if one becomes established in wisdom. And therefore, that is the person of one who is established. Now, what about the steady wisdom? The one who is trying to get into establishment of this wisdom, he says, one whose turbulent senses can carry away the mind even though he's striving. So like most of us who are seekers, sometimes the mind just gets carried away by the turbulent senses. We are trying to restrain all the senses and sitting steadfast, absorbed in meditation in the self, steady wisdom and senses under control. See, we are still practicing, whereas the other person has already got established. Okay, and the one who moves amongst objects, senses control, free from attachment or aversion, he attains peace at a certain level, peace with a small p here. One who attains peace, all pains are destroyed and mind becomes tranquil and steady. And one whose knowledge is steady and senses are completely controlled. Now he's getting to this point whereby senses are getting controlled, the mind is getting controlled, actions, choices are being made in the right way, Dharma operating system is now functioning, and his mind starts to become tranquil and steady. Why? Because it is going towards purification. This is a sattvification which is taking place, and in this steady wisdom, this is what this person looks like. Okay, so what about the unsteady person? The unsteady person who is always falling down the ladder of fall. This is wonderfully described by Lord Krishna in 62 and 63. And just watch yourself. You will see yourself, and I've seen myself falling down this ladder many times. You start thinking of an object, what happens? Attachment to that object develops, desire for that object begins to come about, anger begins to arise because we can't get what we want. The fruit of the action is what we are attached to. Anger begins to develop. We get into a state of delusion. Discrimination disappears. Rationality disappears. We become overwhelmed. Okay. Does it remind you of somebody? Arjuna again. Discrimination is gone. He gets confused. Loss of memory. Loss of memory means all my past experiences which have given me some wisdom, that also begins to disappear. And then we are no longer a kind of human being functioning in a human way. Our humanity as if perishes. Okay, this is the ladder of fall, and this is what happens. We go from an upright being to going back to being in that state of devolution. So this person who is unsteady, he is the one who goes down the ladder of fall, one who has no knowledge, therefore is not able to meditate, therefore has no peace, therefore is not happy, whose mind follows the wandering senses, whose discrimination is carried away like the boat on the waters, is the desirer of desires. Desire of desires. Another wonderful phrase. It keeps on desiring. And he wants desires. This is the unsteady person, and he is not able to establish himself. So again, coming back to the three things again: unsteady, full of desires, attachments, in the me and the mind mode, agitated, no control of senses or mind, slips down the ladder, sleeping in ignorance, steady one who his senses and mind are getting under control, controlling his desires, attachments, anger, and fear, steady in wisdom, able to meditate on the self, and the one who is established, satisfied in the self, by the self. If nothing else, just remember this phrase: satisfied in the self, by the self, no desires. Free from anger and fear, no I-ness, no minus, equanimity, steady wisdom, peace and tranquility, awake in the Brahmic state, beyond delusion. So this is a wonderful section of the Bhagavad Gita. Um, Gurudev has spoken about it in a lot of detail. So has Swamiji, so has Guruji. And if you read the commentary in the Bhagavad Gita, very good commentary by Gurudev, and it explains in a lot of detail what this is all about. And I urge you to again, go through these slides, get the idea of what this is all about, how the whole thing is structured, and then read the individual commentary on the individual verses. Then it will all come together. It will make sense, and you'll begin to see that what the knowledge is, what the practice is, and how to become steady in the knowledge, and then to get established in the knowledge. Okay, now this is what will you do now? So this is now for you. Okay, so how are you going to step out of delusion? This is the exercise for the next month. So while you do your listening and your reflection and contemplation, this is what you're going to try and do every day on a day-to-day basis, changing beliefs, attitude, intention according to the teaching of the Bhagavad Gita, the guidance of Lord Krishna, from the ego operating system to the divine operating system, and then from the divine operating system to the God operating system. Number one, let go of attachments to things, people, situation. Become self-aware. What is happening? What am I attached to? What are the things I am attached to? Who are the people I'm attached to? What are the kind of situation I'm attached to? How can I let go of the things and the people and the situation? Making conscious effort of letting go. Let go of identification with the body, mind, intellect. I'm not the body, I'm not the mind, I'm not the intellect. Go through this meditation process every day. And I've sent you the link for that meditation. It's also on the Living Through the Gita channel. You can just listen to it every day, and the identification with the body, mind, intellect, you can let go through that kind of simple meditation. Stop the generation of more karma by selfless action without attachment. Let go of the likes and dislikes. Let go of superimposition. Such a person, such a thing, situation is like this, like that. We superimpose so many things on everything around us. And then let go of subject of the duality, get into a state of meditative state, and then become established in the non-dual state. So the last two, 6 and 7, are meditative exercises. The rest of the things, while we are in the state of transaction in the world, we have to become much more self-aware. Okay, so these are the things to do. How is it going to be done? Again, I'll bring in the 4ABCD: conscious living. Become aware of what is you are attached to. What is your belief about this person, this thing? Why are you so attached to this, that, and the other? And become aware of all this. Become alert where the attachment is. Pay attention to that and take some action to let go. the 4 B's of learning about letting go of the ego self. Remember that you have to think about where this is coming from, what are the beliefs which are making you to behave in such a way, and what are your reactions. When you learn more and more about the ego operating system, you are able to control it even more. And then the 4 C's of commitment. How are you going to commit yourself to this kind of way of functioning? By the 4 C's: clarity, comprehension, conviction, and commitment. And the 4 D's of the attitudes to sadhana and abhyas: determination, devotion, dedication, and discipline. Okay, this is all to be done in the context of duty. So here how it is going to be done, and this is what you're going to be attempting in your day-to-day life. This is an exercise by going through the slides again, learning about the knowledge, learning about how the practice is going to be done, keeping this paradigms in mind, become consciously living in your moment-to-moment, day-to-day basis, and then having this commitment and changing your attitudes and learning about letting go. This is all you have to do. So thank you very much. And we'll now continue next month. We are going to be doing chapter number 3. Thank you so much.